My name is Bernadine Wells, and I am 74 years old. The night I found out my husband had lied about everything for decades, I was sitting at the edge of our bed, folding his socks. Not because he asked me to. Because that's what I had always done. The lamp beside me cast a soft yellow light across the room. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall, the same clock we bought when we first moved in, the one he said was a good investment. That clock had been lying too. I just didn't know it yet. I heard the lie by accident. That's the funny thing about the truth. It doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it slips in quietly, wearing a familiar voice, speaking words it was never supposed to say. My husband, Calvin Wells, was on the phone in the living room. He thought I was asleep. I was. I had gotten up to use the bathroom, and as I passed the hallway, I heard my name. "She still doesn't know," Calvin said softly. I stopped walking. My hand froze against the wall. "Doesn't know what?" "I told you," he continued, voice low and tired. "I handled it years ago. Everything is in my name, always has been." My stomach dropped. Handled what? I leaned closer to the wall, my heart starting to beat faster. "She trusted me," he said. "She always did." That was when I knew. Whatever he was talking about, it involved me. And I wasn't supposed to know. Before I go any further, let me pause right here. If you love deep, emotional stories about family, betrayal, and late-life truth, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss stories like this. And please tell me in the comments where you are watching from, so I know who is here with me. Because what I overheard that night shattered 47 years of marriage. And what I did the next day changed everything. I stood there in the hallway, holding my breath like a child hiding from thunder. Calvin laughed softly into the phone, a sound I hadn't heard in years. Not that kind of laugh. "That's why I married her," he said. "She never questioned anything." Never questioned anything. The words burned. I backed away slowly, my legs trembling, and returned to the bedroom without making a sound. I sat on the bed, staring at the socks in my hands. Gray, worn thin at the heel. Just like the trust I thought we had. When Calvin came to bed later, he acted normal. Too normal. He kissed my forehead like he always did, slipped under the covers, turned off the light. "You asleep?" he asked. "Yes," I lied. He sighed, relaxed. The man slept peacefully beside me. I did not sleep at all. All night, memories played in my head like broken film. The day we married. The house he said he bought for us. The business he claimed failed because of bad luck. The savings account he told me not to worry about. I had trusted him with everything. My money. My future. My silence. And now, I wondered what else had been handled years ago. The next morning, I woke up before him. That alone was strange. Usually, Calvin woke first, made coffee, read the paper. That morning, I moved quietly. Carefully. I went into the kitchen and sat at the table. The same table, where I signed papers without reading them. Where I nodded when he said, "This is best for us." Where I believed him. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stared at my reflection in the dark window. "Who are you?" I whispered to myself. I had been a wife. A mother. A supporter. But had I ever been informed? When Calvin finally came in, he smiled. "Morning, Bernie," he said. I looked up. "How long have you been lying to me?" I asked. The smile froze on his face. "What?" he said. "I heard you last night," I continued calmly. "On the phone." His eyes flicked away for half a second. Just long enough. "You must have misunderstood," he said quickly. I set my cup down. "I heard my name," I said, "and I heard you say I didn't know." He laughed nervously. "You were half asleep," he said. "You're imagining things." That was his favorite move. Make me doubt myself. I leaned back in my chair. Calvin, I said slowly, what did you handle years ago? His jaw tightened. Nothing that concerns you, he said. I stared at him. I am your wife, I replied. Everything concerns me. He sighed, annoyed now. You always get emotional over nothing, he said. Let it go. Let it go. 47 years of marriage. And he wanted me to let it go. Something shifted inside me. Not anger. Focus. Fine, I said. I'll let it go. Relief washed over his face. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door. I'll be back later, he said. I watched him leave. Then I stood up. And for the first time in my life, I didn't let it go. I went into the spare room. The one Calvin called junk storage. Inside were boxes stacked high, covered in dust. Papers. Old files. Things he said were unimportant. I pulled one box down and opened it. Inside were documents. Deeds. Bank statements. Letters. My hands started to shake. I picked up a deed. The house. Our house. Only one name was on it. Calvin. Not mine. Never mine. My heart pounded. I grabbed another paper. A bank account. Thousands of dollars. Opened decades ago. Only his name. Another folder. A business license. Active. Profitable. He had told me it failed. He had told me we were broke. I sat on the floor, surrounded by paper. The truth spilled out around me. Every sacrifice I made. Every job I quit to support him. Every dream I delayed. Built on lies. Carefully told. Repeated for decades. I thought of all the times I said, I trust you. And all the times he smiled and nodded. I pressed my hand to my chest. I wasn't crying. I was remembering. And remembering hurt more. By the time Calvin came home that evening, I had filled 3 folders. I labeled them carefully. Property. Finance. Lies. I placed them neatly on the dining table. I cooked dinner. Served his plate. Watched him eat. Every bite felt like a countdown. Bernie, he said casually, you're quiet today. I smiled. I'm listening, I replied. He frowned slightly. Listening to what? He asked. I stood up and walked to the table. I placed the folders in front of him. Everything, I said. His fork stopped midair. What is this? He asked. I opened the first folder and slid the deed toward him. Explain, I said. His face went pale. That was the moment. The moment the mask cracked. The moment the lie ran out of breath. But what Calvin didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Because the next day, I wouldn't just confront him. I would show the world the receipts. And he would never see it coming. Calvin did not speak for a long time. He just stared at the folder like it might bite him. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were leaning in, listening. I stood there quietly, watching my husband of 47 years look at the proof of his own lies. Where did you get this? He finally asked. His voice was low, careful. I folded my arms. From the house you said belonged to both of us, I replied. From the boxes you told me were junk. He swallowed. You went through my things, he said, trying to sound offended. I laughed once, short, dry. Our things, I corrected. Or at least that's what you told me they were. He pushed the folder away like it disgusted him. You don't understand, he said. This is complicated. That word again. Complicated. It was the same word he used every time I asked questions over the years. Why don't I sign anything? Why don't I see the bank statements? Why can't I come to meetings with you? It's complicated, Bernie. Just trust me. I had. Every time. I pulled out another document. The business license. Active. Profitable. You told me this failed in '92, I said calmly. You cried at the table and said we'd have to tighten our belts. He rubbed his face. That was true at the time, he muttered. This says it's been profitable every year since, I said, tapping the paper. Where did the money go, Calvin? He didn't answer. I waited. You don't know how much pressure I was under, he finally said. I was trying to protect you. I felt my jaw tighten. From what? I asked. From stress, he replied. From disappointment, from worry. I leaned forward slightly. You protected me from the truth, I said. That's not protection, that's control. His eyes flashed. You wouldn't have handled it, he snapped. There it was. The sentence he'd been holding back for decades. I felt a strange calm settle over me. You decided that for me, I said, every single time. He stood up abruptly and began packing the room. You always trusted me, he said. You never wanted to deal with this stuff. That's a lie, I replied. You just never gave me the chance. He stopped packing. You stayed, he said. You never complained. I was loyal, I corrected. There's a difference. He sat back down heavily. What do you want? He asked. The question stunned me. What did I want? For 47 years, I had wanted peace, stability, a good marriage, a future that felt safe. Now, I want the truth, I said, all of it. He scoffed. You wouldn't like it, he said. I met his eyes. Try me. He leaned back and crossed his arms. I handled the money because you're bad with numbers, he said. That's another lie, I replied. I paid the bills before we married. You're emotional, he continued. You make decisions with your heart. And you make them without conscience, I said quietly. That landed. He flinched. I picked up the second folder. Bank statements. Accounts I had never seen. Balances I had never known existed. You told me we couldn't afford vacations, I said. You told me we couldn't help the kids with school. You told me we had to be careful. He looked away. I reinvested, he said. Into what? I asked. Silence. I flipped another page. Transfers. Large ones. Regular. To an account I didn't recognize. What is this? I asked. His shoulders slumped. Don't, he said. Tell me, I replied. He hesitated. Then spoke. I had another family, he said quietly. The words sucked the air out of the room. I sat down slowly. Another family. I stared at him. How long? I asked. 20 years, he replied. My ears rang. 20 years. While I packed his lunches. While I waited up for him. While I believed every excuse. You used our money, I said slowly, to support another family. He nodded once. I didn't want you to know, he said. It would have destroyed you. I laughed. You did it anyway, I said. He looked at me, eyes glassy. I loved you, he said. I just needed more. I felt something finally break. Not my heart. My illusion. I stood up. Did they know about me? I asked. Yes, he admitted. They knew you were my wife. And you let me look like a fool, I said. All those years. He said nothing. I walked out of the room and into the spare bedroom again. I opened more boxes. Letters. Birthday cards. Photos. A woman younger than me. Children with his eyes. I felt sick. But I kept going. Because I had learned something important. The truth does not hurt less when you stop looking. It hurts more. I spent the rest of the day reading. Piecing together a life I never knew I was living beside. Accounts. Property deeds. insurance policies, all in his name, all hidden, carefully, deliberately. When Calvin knocked on the door that evening, I didn't answer. "Bernie," he said softly, "we need to talk." I opened the door. "I'm done talking," I said. "I'm documenting." He looked confused. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means I'm no longer trusting your memory," I replied. "Only paper." That night, I slept in the spare room. For the first time since our honeymoon. The bed felt strange, but honest. The next morning, I woke up early again. I made coffee, sat at the table, and began organizing everything. Chronologically, decade by decade. I labeled folders. 1978, 1989, 1990, 1999, 2000, 2009, 2010, now. Every lie had a date. Every secret had a paper trail. Receipts do not argue. They wait. Calvin watched me from the doorway. "You're tearing us apart," he said. "No," I replied without looking up. "I'm seeing us clearly." He shook his head. "You're going to ruin everything," he warned. I looked up. "You already did," I said. "I'm just holding the mirror." By midday, my phone rang. My sister. "Bernie," she said carefully, "Calvin called me." Of course he did. "He told me you're confused," she continued, "that you're spiraling." I closed my eyes. "Did he tell you about the other family?" I asked. Silence. "No," she said slowly. "Did he tell you about the accounts?" I continued. "No," she admitted. "Then he's still lying," I said, "and I'm still sane." Another pause. "Send me what you have," my sister said finally. I felt a small surge of strength. That evening, Calvin tried again. "We can fix this," he said. "We don't need outsiders." "I am not hiding for you anymore," I replied. "You're embarrassing me," he snapped. I smiled sadly. That's how I know I'm telling the truth. As night fell, I stacked the folders neatly. I looked at them. At 47 years of marriage, reduced to evidence. And I made a decision. Tomorrow, I would not argue. I would not beg. I would not shout. I would show. Because lies thrive in confusion. And I had something stronger. Receipts. The morning I decided to take the truth outside my house, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time. Not fixing my hair. Not adjusting my clothes. Just looking. Really looking. The woman staring back at me looked tired, older than I remembered. But there was something else there too, something new, something sharp behind the eyes. Awake. "For 47 years," I said softly to my reflection, "you trusted the wrong person." I paused. "But you're not wrong for trusting," I added. "He was wrong for lying." That mattered. I dressed simply. A plain light gray blouse, dark skirt, comfortable shoes. No jewelry, no perfume. I didn't want distractions. I wanted truth. On the dining table, the folders sat in a neat stack. Thick, heavy, loud without making a sound. Receipts. I slid them into a large tote bag. When I lifted it, I was surprised by the weight. "That's what lies feel like," I muttered. "Heavy when you finally carry them yourself." Calvin was sitting in the living room, pretending to read the paper. He looked up when he heard the zipper. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Out," I replied. "With what?" he pressed. I met his eyes. "With the truth." His face tightened. "You don't need to do this," he said. "We can handle this privately." I walked toward the door. "You handled it privately for decades," I said. "Now it's my turn." The first place I went was the bank. The same bank we had used for years. The same building Calvin walked into proudly, shaking hands with managers while I sat in the waiting area reading old magazines. This time, I walked in alone. A young woman at the desk smiled politely. "How can I help you, ma'am?" she asked. "My name is Bernadine Wells," I said. "I need to see every account connected to my husband." Her smile faltered slightly. "Are you an account holder?" she asked. "I'm a spouse," I replied, "and I've been misled for decades." That got her attention. They brought a manager, an older man with kind eyes and a careful voice. "I understand there's a concern," he said. I placed the folders on his desk. "These are not concerns," I replied. "These are facts." He flipped through the documents slowly. His eyebrows rose, then knit together. "These accounts," he said, "they've been active a long time." "Yes," I replied, "without my knowledge." He leaned back. "I'm going to need to look into this further," he said carefully. "I'll wait," I replied. For the first time in my life, I did not rush to make someone else comfortable. While I waited, I thought about all the times Calvin said, "I'll handle it." I had believed him. I thought being a good wife meant not asking too many questions. Now I understood something painful. Silence had never protected me. It had protected him. After nearly an hour, the manager returned. "Mrs. Wells," he said gently, "you should have been informed." I nodded. "I know. There are assets here you were never listed on," he continued. "Significant ones." "I know," I repeated. He hesitated. "You may want legal counsel," he added. "I already do," I replied. For the first time that day, I smiled. When I got home, Calvin was packing. "You went to the bank," he said. "Yes," I replied. "They called me," he snapped. "You're making this ugly." I set my bag down. "It was always ugly," I said. "You just hid it well." "You're trying to punish me," he accused. "No," I replied calmly. "I'm trying to understand my own life." He scoffed. "At your age," he said, "why now?" That question burned. "Because I'm still alive," I said, "and I deserve to know the truth before I die." He had no answer for that. That afternoon, I made more calls. An accountant. A lawyer. My sister. Each time, I told the story the same way. Slow. Clear. Without drama. Facts don't need drama. They stand on their own. My sister came over that evening. She sat at the table, flipping through the folders, her mouth slightly open. "He did all this?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "For how long?" she whispered. "Longer than I want to count," I said. She looked up at me, eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry," she said. I nodded. "I am too," I replied, "but I'm not ashamed." She squeezed my hand. "You shouldn't be," she said. "He should." Calvin watched us from the doorway. "You're turning her against me," he said. "No," my sister replied sharply. "You did that yourself." He looked stunned. For the first time, his control cracked publicly. That night, Calvin tried a different approach. He came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes. "I made mistakes," he said quietly, "but we had a good life." I didn't turn around. "We had a life," I said. "I don't know how much of it was good." "You were happy," he insisted. I faced him. "I was trusting," I corrected. "There's a difference." He reached for my arm. I stepped back. "Don't," I said. He froze. "I'm not your secret anymore," I continued, "and I'm not your shield." His eyes filled with something like fear. "You're going to ruin me," he whispered. I thought about that. About how often women are told that telling the truth is destruction. "You ruined yourself," I said. "I just stopped pretending." Later that night, I sat alone in the spare room. I opened my notebook and began writing again. Not about anger. About clarity. I wrote down dates, conversations, lies I had believed. I wrote until my hand hurt. And with every word, I felt lighter. The next morning, something unexpected happened. The doorbell rang. When I opened it, a woman stood there. Young, nervous, familiar. I knew her face. From the photos. The other woman. She held her purse tight against her chest. "Are you Bernadine?" she asked softly. "Yes," I replied. She swallowed. "My name is Elaine," she said. "We need to talk." My heart skipped. "About Calvin," she added. I stepped aside and let her in. This was not how I expected the truth to expand. But truth rarely asks permission. We sat at opposite ends of the couch. "I didn't know he was still lying to you," Elaine said quickly. "He told me you knew everything." I laughed once. "No," I said. "He told me nothing." Tears spilled from her eyes. "I feel sick," she whispered. I thought you had an arrangement." "So did I replied. "Just a different one." She looked at me with something like shame. "He promised he'd leave," she said. "For years." I nodded. "He promised me honesty," I replied. "For decades." She handed me an envelope. "I brought these," she said. Inside were copies. Transfers, messages, photos. More receipts. I closed my eyes. Of course. Of course there were more. "I'm leaving him," Elaine said quietly. I thought you deserved to know." I looked at her. "Thank you," I said. She blinked. "You're not angry at me?" she asked. I shook my head. "You didn't lie to me," I replied. "He did." She cried harder. When Elaine left, I sat in silence. The house felt different now. Not haunted. Exposed. Calvin came home later that evening. He saw the envelope on the table. "You met her," he said. "Yes," I replied. His shoulders sagged. "She gave you things," he said. "Yes," I replied again. He sank into a chair. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he muttered. I looked at him. "It was always going to," I said. "You just delayed it." He looked up at me, eyes red. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I thought of the bank. The lawyer. My sister. The receipts multiplying like truth finally breathing. "I'm going to keep going," I said. He swallowed. "And me?" he asked. I met his eyes. "You're going to face what you built," I said, "without hiding behind me." That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something powerful. The truth had left the house. And once truth steps outside, it doesn't come back quietly. Because tomorrow, I wouldn't just show the receipts to family. I would show them to the people who mattered most. And Calvin's carefully built life was about to collapse under its own weight. The morning after Elaine came to my house, I woke up with a strange calm in my chest. Not peace. Readiness. It felt like the quiet before a storm, when the air is still, but everything knows what's coming. I lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to Calvin move around in the other room. The sound of his footsteps no longer comforted me. They sounded hollow now, like echoes of a man who had already lost something important. His control. I got dressed slowly. A plain navy blue blouse, dark slacks, comfortable shoes. Normal clothes. No armor. Because I wasn't going to fight with noise. I was going to fight with facts. At the kitchen table, I laid everything out again. My folders. Elaine's envelope. Notes from the bank. Dates, names, amounts. The truth looked big when it was all together. Too big to hide. Too heavy to deny. Calvin walked in and stopped short when he saw the table. "You're not done," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm just getting started." He rubbed his temples. "You don't understand what this will do," he said. "I understand exactly what it will do," I replied. "It will end the lie." "You'll ruin my name," he snapped. I looked up. "You built your name on deception," I said. "It was already ruined, I just didn't know it." He slammed his hand on the table. "Why can't you just let this stay private?" he shouted. I flinched, but only for a second. Then I straightened my back. "Because your lies didn't stay private," I said. "They shaped my entire life." Silence filled the kitchen. Heavy, uncomfortable. By mid-morning, I had made my decision. I called my lawyer. Then my accountant. Then my sister. "We're meeting today," I said. "All of us." Calvin overheard and laughed bitterly. "You're staging a trial in your own house," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm opening the windows." They arrived that afternoon. My sister first, carrying a notebook and worry in her eyes. Then the accountant, quiet, serious. Then my lawyer, calm and prepared. We sat around the dining table. Calvin stayed in the living room, pretending not to listen. But he was listening. I knew he was. I spoke first. "I need everyone to see this," I said, sliding the folders forward, "because I was kept in the dark for decades." The accountant flipped through the papers slowly. His face changed with every page. "These transfers," he said, "they're consistent, long-term." "Yes," I replied, "to another household." My sister covered her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. The lawyer leaned forward. "This is financial deception within a marriage," she said, "and possibly much more." Calvin stood up. "You're twisting this," he shouted from the doorway. "No," the accountant replied calmly. "The numbers speak clearly." That sentence hit harder than any insult. For the first time, Calvin was outnumbered. Not by anger. By truth. The accountant pointed to a document. "This business," he said, "has been profitable for years." Calvin looked at the floor. "You told Bernadine it failed," my sister said, her voice shaking with anger. Calvin said nothing. The lawyer closed her folder slowly. "Bernadine," she said, "you have been deliberately misled about assets, income, property." I nodded. "I know," I said. "I lived it." Calvin finally spoke again. "I was trying to keep things stable," he said weakly. The lawyer looked at him. "Stability built on lies collapses," she said. He had no answer. That evening, after they left, Calvin tried one last time. "You're turning everyone against me," he said quietly. I looked at him. "No," I replied. "You're just standing in the light now." He shook his head. "You don't need to do more," he said. "This is enough." I picked up Elaine's envelope. "There is no enough when the truth has been buried this long," I said. That night, I slept deeply. Not because I was no longer hurt, but because I was no longer confused. The next morning, I received a call. From someone I didn't expect. A man named Harold, an old friend of Calvin. "Bernadine," he said slowly, "I heard things that don't sound like the man I know." I took a breath. "They don't sound like him," I replied, "because you never knew him." There was silence. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Bring coffee." By noon, Harold was sitting at my table, listening as I showed him the receipts. His hands trembled. "He borrowed money from me," Harold said quietly. "Said it was for business losses." I met his eyes. "It wasn't," I said. Harold closed his eyes. "Oh God," he whispered. Another crack. By evening, the phone would not stop ringing. Friends. Relatives. People who had trusted Calvin. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just showed. And the more I showed, the more his perfect image fractured. Calvin watched it all unravel from the couch. "You're enjoying this," he accused. I shook my head. "No," I said, "I'm surviving it." He looked smaller now. Older. Like a man who had spent too long holding up walls that were never real. As night fell, I sat alone at the table again. Receipts spread out like a map of my life. I realized something important. This wasn't revenge. This was recovery, taking back years that had been stolen quietly. And tomorrow, I would take the truth one step further, because there were still lies left. And the most dangerous ones were the ones he thought no one would ever question. By the 5th day, Calvin stopped pretending. He no longer paced the house or raised his voice. He didn't slam doors or argue. Instead, he grew quiet in a way that felt heavy and dangerous, like a man counting his losses one by one. That silence told me something important. The lies were no longer holding. They were collapsing. It started early that morning. The phone rang before I finished my tea. I answered calmly. "Bernadine," a man's voice said, unsure. "This is Mr. Lawson from church." I closed my eyes for a brief moment. "Yes," I said, "I know who you are." He cleared his throat. "Calvin asked me to call," he said. "He said there were misunderstandings." Of course he did. "What misunderstandings?" I asked. There was a pause. "He said you're confused," Mr. Lawson continued carefully. "That you're angry and reacting emotionally." I smiled sadly. "Did he mention the other family?" I asked. Silence. "Did he mention the hidden accounts?" I continued. Longer silence. "Did he mention the money he borrowed from people while lying about being broke?" I finished. Mr. Lawson exhaled sharply. "No," he admitted. "Then he's still lying," I said calmly, "and I'm done covering for him." By mid-morning, 3 more calls came in. 2 from people Calvin owed money to. 1 from a woman who had worked at his business years ago. Each call followed the same pattern. They were confused, then stunned, then angry. Not at me. At him. Calvin finally exploded. He stormed into the kitchen while I was sorting papers. "Stop answering the phone," he shouted. I didn't look up. "Stop lying," I replied. "You're destroying my life," he yelled. I set the papers down and met his eyes. "You destroyed mine quietly," I said. "I'm just doing it loudly." His face twisted. "You think these people care about you?" he sneered. "They'll forget you." I stood up slowly. "They won't forget the receipts," I said. That afternoon, something happened that truly shifted the ground beneath him. 2 men came to the door. Well-dressed, serious. One introduced himself. "Mr. Wells?" he asked. Calvin stepped forward, nervous. "Yes," he said. "We'd like to speak with you regarding financial discrepancies," the man said calmly. My heart beat faster, but not with fear. With confirmation. Calvin turned to me. "What did you do?" he whispered. I met his eyes. "I told the truth," I said, "and the truth travels." They sat at the table. The same table where Calvin once signed papers and told me not to worry. Now he was the one sweating. The men asked questions. About transfers. About property. About loans. Calvin stuttered, dodged, shrugged. I sat quietly, watching. For once, I didn't explain for him. When the men left, Calvin collapsed into a chair. "You wanted this," he said bitterly. "No," I replied. "I wanted honesty." "You're enjoying watching me fall," he accused. I shook my head. "I'm watching gravity work," I said. That evening, Elaine called me. "I'm so sorry," she said. "He told me people were contacting him." "Yes," I replied, "they are." "He's panicking," she said. I sighed. "He should have panicked 20 years ago," I said, "before he built a life on lies." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said finally. "For what?" I asked. "For not blaming me," she replied. "For seeing the truth." I swallowed. "We were both lied to," I said. "That matters." Late that night, Calvin tried one last trick. He came into the spare room where I was sleeping. "I'll give you everything," he said quietly. "The house, the accounts, whatever you want." I sat up slowly. You don't get to bargain now, I replied. You'll leave me with nothing, he said. I met his eyes. You left me with nothing for decades, I said. I survived. He reached out. Bernie, he whispered, please. I stepped back. No, I said. This ends the right way, or it doesn't end at all. He left the room without another word. The next morning, I did something symbolic. I changed the locks. Not out of fear. Out of finality. When Calvin realized, he didn't shout. He just stared at the door. I live here, he said quietly. No, I replied. You stayed here, there's a difference. By afternoon, news had traveled far. Friends stopped defending him. Excuses dried up. People stopped asking me to forgive and started asking him to explain. And he couldn't. Because lies don't age well. As I sat alone that evening, I realized something important. I wasn't exposing him to hurt him. I was exposing him to free myself. There is a difference. A powerful one. And tomorrow, I would make the decision that would finally separate my life from his lies. The kind of decision that ends one chapter completely and starts another with no turning back. The morning I made my first irreversible move, I woke up before the sun. Not because I couldn't sleep, because my body already knew. For days, my life had been filled with noise, phone calls, papers, voices, questions, explanations. Everyone wanted something from me. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted me to react. But that morning was quiet. And in that quiet, one thought rose clearly above all the others. I could not heal while still tied to his lies. I sat at the edge of the bed and looked around the spare room that had become my refuge. A simple bed. A small lamp. My notebook on the nightstand. This room had seen more truth in 1 week than my marriage had seen in decades. I stood up, stretched my aching joints, and whispered to myself, today, you choose yourself again. Calvin was asleep on the couch when I passed through the living room. His mouth was slightly open. His face looked older than it had a month ago. For the first time, he looked like a man who had lost control of his story. I felt no joy in that. Only distance. I grabbed my coat and my tote bag, the same bag that now carried copies of my life, and stepped outside. The air was cool and sharp. It woke me up fully. The lawyer's office smelled like paper and coffee. Ms. Hartley greeted me with a calm nod. You're sure? She asked gently as I sat down. Yes, I replied. She studied my face carefully. This will change everything, she said. I know, I replied. That's the point. She laid the papers in front of me. Legal language. Formal words. Sharp edges. Petition for separation of assets. Request for full financial disclosure. Protection of marital interest. Each line felt heavy, but not heavier than staying silent. Once this is filed, Ms. Hartley said, there's no pretending this is a misunderstanding anymore. I picked up the pen. There never was a misunderstanding, I said. There was a lie. My hand trembled as I signed. Not from doubt. From release. As the ink dried, something inside me shifted. I was no longer the woman asking questions. I was the woman demanding answers. When I got home, Calvin was waiting. He stood in the doorway like he had been there for hours. Where did you go? He asked. To make things official, I replied. His eyes narrowed. What things? I set my bag down and looked at him. I filed paperwork, I said, to separate what's mine from what you hid. His face drained of color. You did what? He whispered. I stopped being your wife on paper, I replied. He laughed weakly. You can't just do that, he said. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said. I'm protecting myself. You're overreacting, he snapped. This could have been fixed. I met his eyes. You don't fix decades of lies, I said. You end them. He ran a hand through his hair, packing. "You're going to take everything," he said bitterly. "I'm going to take the truth," I replied. "The rest will follow the law." "The law," he scoffed. "Since when do you care about that?" "Since I learned you didn't," I said. He stopped packing and looked at me. "You wouldn't have survived without me," he said quietly. The old wound. The one he always used. I felt it sting, but it no longer controlled me. "I survived despite you," I replied. "That's what scares you." He stared at me, speechless. That afternoon, I began another hard task. I called my children. Every one of them. One by one. Not to accuse. Not to cry. To tell the truth. The first call was the hardest. "Mom," my daughter said, "is everything okay?" "No," I replied gently, "but I am." She laughed nervously. "What does that mean?" "It means your father lied to me for decades," I said, "and I just found out." Silence. Then disbelief. Then questions. I answered them calmly. With dates. With facts. With receipts. By the end of the call, she was crying. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm telling you now." The second call was angrier. "You're exaggerating," my son said. "Dad wouldn't do that." I took a breath. "Come see the papers," I said. "Then decide." He didn't respond right away. But he didn't hang up. By evening, Calvin knew. He watched me make the calls. "You're poisoning them against me," he accused. "No," I replied. "I'm giving them the truth you denied them." "You're breaking this family," he said. I looked at him calmly. "You broke it," I replied. "I just stopped holding it together alone." That night, something unexpected happened. My son came over. He didn't knock. He just walked in, eyes red, jaw tight. "Show me," he said. I didn't say a word. I handed him the folders. He sat at the table, flipping through page after page. Minutes passed. Then more. Finally, he looked up at his father. "Is this real?" he asked. Calvin said nothing. That was answer enough. My son stood up slowly. "You let Mom believe we were struggling," he said. "You let her sacrifice everything." Calvin looked away. "I did what I had to," he muttered. "No," my son said. "You did what you wanted." The words landed hard. When my son left, the house felt hollow again. But this time, it wasn't loneliness. It was separation. Late that night, I sat alone at the table. I looked at the papers again. Not with pain. With purpose. I realized something important. Leaving wasn't the hardest part. Letting go of the woman who accepted lies as love was. And I was finally doing that. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, Calvin spoke from the dark. "You think this makes you strong," he said. I paused. "This makes me honest," I replied. "Strength came later. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Arguments. Legal steps. More truth. But tonight, I slept as a woman who had taken her life back on paper. And nothing scares a liar more than that." The first letter arrived on a Thursday morning. It was thick, official, heavy in my hands. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. Calvin had decided to fight. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had signed papers blindly for decades, and slid my finger under the envelope flap. Inside were words that felt sharp even before I understood them fully. Response to petition. Denial of claims. Counterstatement. Calvin was denying everything. Not some of it. Not parts of it. Everything. I felt my chest tighten, not with fear but with disbelief. After all the receipts. After the accounts. After Elaine. After the children. He was still lying. I read slowly. Line by line. He claimed I had always known about the finances. that I had chosen not to be involved, that I was now confused and influenced by outside parties. Outside parties. That's what he called truth. I sat back in my chair and laughed softly. It sounded strange in the quiet house. You really don't know when to stop, I whispered. When Ms. Hartley called later that morning, her voice was calm. He's pushing back, she said. Hard. I expected that, I replied. He's claiming you were aware, she continued, that this is retaliation. I closed my eyes. Do we have enough? I asked. She didn't hesitate. We have more than enough, she said, but this will get uglier before it gets honest. By the afternoon, the phone calls started again. Not from friends. From family. Calvin had begun his campaign. My niece called first. Aunt Bernie, she said hesitantly, Uncle Calvin says you're being manipulated. I breathed in slowly. By who? I asked. She hesitated. He didn't say. Then he's still lying, I replied gently. An old family friend called next. Calvin says you've changed, she said, that you're not yourself. I smiled sadly. That's true, I replied. I stopped pretending. There was silence on the line. Then softly, I hope you're okay. So do I replied. That evening, Calvin confronted me directly. He stood in the doorway, letter in hand. You didn't have to do this, he said. I didn't, I replied. You did. You're dragging my name through the mud, he snapped. I met his eyes. Your name was written in lies, I said. Mud just shows it. He slammed the letter onto the table. You think the court will take your side, he demanded. I think the truth doesn't pick sides, I replied. It just stands. His face twisted. You were happy, he said sharply. You had everything you needed. I stood up slowly. I had what you allowed, I said. That's not happiness. You're rewriting history, he accused. No, I said. I'm finally reading it. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid. Because my mind kept replaying the man I had married. The jokes he used to tell. The hand on my back at church. The way he'd say, don't worry, I've got it. I wondered how long that man had been real. And how long he'd been an act. The next day brought another shock. My son returned. This time, he wasn't alone. He brought his sister. They sat across from me, serious, grown in a way that hurt. We talked, my daughter said, about Dad. And, I asked. She swallowed. He admitted some things, she said. My stomach tightened. What things? I asked. That he hid money, my son said. That he lied about the business. I nodded. And the other family? I asked. They exchanged a look. He didn't deny it, my daughter said quietly. That was enough. My daughter reached for my hand. I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner, she said. I squeezed her fingers. I didn't see it either, I replied. That doesn't make us weak. My son leaned forward. He's asking us to testify, he said, to say you always knew. I felt something cold move through my chest. And, I asked. My son shook his head. No, he said firmly, we won't lie for him. Tears filled my eyes. That mattered more than winning. That afternoon, Ms. Hartley called again. We have a hearing date, she said. Soon. How soon? I asked. Soon enough that he's nervous, she replied. I smiled faintly. Good. The days leading up to the hearing were tense. Calvin stopped speaking to me unless he had to. When he did, his words were sharp. You're enjoying the attention, he said once. I'm enduring it, I replied. You want sympathy, he sneered. I wanted honesty, I said. This is what came instead. One night, he said something that chilled me. You won't recognize me if you keep pushing, he warned. I looked at him carefully. I stopped recognizing you a long time ago, I replied. The night before the hearing, I sat alone in the spare room again. My notebook lay open. I wrote one sentence over and over. I did not imagine my life. That mattered, because lies can make you doubt your own memory. But receipts don't forget. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully again. Plain blouse, dark skirt, flat shoes, no armor, just truth. As we walked into the building, Calvin passed me without looking. I watched his reflection in the glass. He looked smaller, tighter, afraid. Inside the courtroom, we took our seats. The judge entered. Papers shuffled. The room held its breath. And I realized something profound. This wasn't just about money, or property, or marriage. This was about whether a woman's silence could be mistaken for consent, and whether truth, spoken late in life, still counted. As the judge began to speak, I felt ready, because no matter what Calvin said next, I had lived the truth, and that was something no lie could undo. The courtroom smelled like old paper and quiet judgment. Not the kind that shouted, the kind that watched. I sat on the hard bench, my hands folded neatly in my lap, feeling the weight of every year that had led me to this moment. Across the aisle, Calvin sat stiffly beside his lawyer, jaw tight, eyes forward. He did not look at me. That used to hurt. Today it didn't. When the judge entered, everyone stood. My knees shook slightly, but they held. "Be seated," the judge said. And just like that, decades of lies were about to be spoken out loud. Calvin's lawyer spoke first. Smooth, confident, practiced. He talked about misunderstandings, about old age, about marital roles. He said Calvin had always handled finances, and that I had been comfortable with that arrangement. I listened quietly, because I knew what came next. Then my lawyer stood. Ms. Hartley's voice was calm, but sharp. "Your Honor," she said, "this case is not about roles, it's about deception." She turned slightly toward me. "My client did not consent to ignorance," she continued. "She was placed in it." Calvin shifted in his seat. The judge nodded. "Mrs. Wells," he said, looking directly at me, "please stand." I stood. My heart pounded, but my voice stayed steady. "How long were you married to Mr. Wells?" the judge asked. 47 years, I replied. "And during those years," he continued, "did you have full knowledge of the household finances?" "No," I said clearly. Calvin's lawyer jumped up. "Objection." "Overruled," the judge said calmly. "Let her answer." I took a breath. "I trusted my husband," I said. "I believed what he told me. I signed what he asked me to sign, and I was told not to worry." The judge leaned forward slightly. "And did you ever request access to financial information?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, "many times." "And what happened?" he asked. "I was told it was complicated," I said, "that it was handled, that I wouldn't understand." The courtroom was silent. Ms. Hartley approached the table. "Your Honor," she said, "with permission, we'd like to present documentation." "Proceed," the judge said. That was my cue. I stepped forward with the box. Not a folder. A box. Heavy. Full. Receipts. I placed it on the table. The sound echoed. Thump. Calvin flinched. Ms. Hartley opened the box. Inside were neatly labeled files. Property records. Bank statements. Business licenses. Loan agreements. Correspondence. The judge raised his eyebrows. "That's extensive," he said. "Yes," Ms. Hartley replied, "because the deception was extensive." One by one, the documents were reviewed. The house deed, only Calvin's name. The business accounts, active for decades. The transfers, to another household. The loans, taken under false pretenses. Calvin's lawyer objected again and again. And again and again. Overruled. Then the judge turned to Calvin. "Mr. Wells," he said, "were these assets disclosed to your wife?" Calvin cleared his throat. "No," he admitted quietly. A murmur rippled through the room. "Why not?" the judge asked. Calvin hesitated. "I thought it was better this way," he said. "For whom?" the judge asked. Calvin said nothing. Ms. Hartley spoke again. "Your Honor," she said, "my client's silence was mistaken for consent. Her trust was mistaken for permission." She turned toward me. "Mrs. Wells," she said gently, "how did learning this truth affect you?" I swallowed. "It felt like my whole life had been written by someone else," I said, "and I was just finding out." The judge's expression softened. Then came the moment I didn't expect. The judge looked directly at Calvin. "Mr. Wells," he said, "did you maintain another household during your marriage?" Calvin's lawyer whispered urgently. But Calvin spoke. "Yes," he said. Gasps filled the room. "How long?" the judge asked. "About 20 years," Calvin replied. I closed my eyes briefly. Even though I knew. Hearing it out loud still hurt. The judge leaned back. "Mrs. Wells," he said, "did you have any knowledge of this?" "No," I replied. "None," he pressed. "None," I said firmly. The judge nodded slowly. Then he said the words that changed everything. "This court does not view deception of this scale as a misunderstanding." Calvin's shoulders slumped. By the time the judge finished speaking, my hands were shaking. But my spirit was steady. The judge ordered full financial disclosure. Asset review. Immediate protections. Calvin's lawyer looked grim. Calvin looked small. As the gavel came down, I realized something powerful. For the first time in decades, the truth was no longer just mine to carry. It was official. Outside the courtroom, people whispered. Some looked at me with pity. Others with respect. Calvin walked past me without a word. I didn't stop him. Ms. Hartley touched my arm. "You did it," she said softly. "No," I replied. "I told it." But as I stepped into the sunlight, something deep inside me knew. This wasn't over. Because Calvin had lost control publicly. And men like him don't accept that quietly. What he would do next would reveal who he truly was. And whether the truth would cost him everything. The day after court did not feel like victory. It felt like aftermath. The kind that comes after a storm, when branches are broken, windows cracked, and the air still smells sharp with damage. I woke up before dawn again, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet house. Calvin was gone. He had not come home the night before. I didn't ask where he went. For the first time in decades, his whereabouts were no longer my responsibility. By morning, the phone started ringing. Not softly. Not politely. Relentlessly. I let the first call go to voicemail. Then the second. Then the third. Finally, I answered. "Mrs. Wells," a woman asked. "This is Marjorie from the community board." I closed my eyes. "Yes," I replied. "We heard about the hearing," she continued carefully. "People are asking questions." "I imagine they are," I said calmly. "Is it true?" she asked. "All of it?" I looked out the window at the pale morning sky. "Yes," I said, "it is." She exhaled slowly. "Thank you for being honest," she said. "That matters." After that, the calls changed. Friends I hadn't heard from in years. People who once praised Calvin openly. Men who had borrowed him money. Women who had admired our marriage. They all asked the same thing. How did you survive not knowing? I answered the same way every time. I trusted, I said, and trust should never be a crime. Around midday, my daughter came over. She looked tired, older than she had the week before. "I didn't sleep," she said as she hugged me. Neither did I replied. She sat at the table, staring at the wood grain. Dad is angry, she said. I nodded. I expected that. He says you ruined him, she continued. I sighed. No, I said gently. I revealed him. She looked up at me. There's a difference, I added. She nodded slowly. I see that now. She hesitated. He wants us to stand by him, she said, to say you exaggerated. I met her eyes. And what do you think? I asked. She swallowed. I saw the papers, she said. I heard him admit it, I won't lie. Tears filled my eyes. That was worth everything. That evening, something unexpected happened. A knock at the door. Firm. Controlled. I opened it. Calvin stood there. He looked different. Not angry. Not confident. Cornered. Can we talk? He asked. I studied his face. We can, I replied, but I won't argue. He nodded. That's fine, he said. We sat at opposite ends of the living room. The space between us felt wider than the room itself. You humiliated me, he said quietly. I didn't respond. You made me look like a monster, he continued. I finally spoke. You told the truth, I said. That's what did it. He clenched his jaw. People are turning on me, he snapped. They're asking questions, I replied. That's not turning. You enjoyed it, he accused. I shook my head. No, I said. I survived it. He leaned forward. You could still stop this, he said. Tell people it was exaggerated. I looked at him carefully. You want me to lie, I said. He didn't deny it. You lied for decades, he said. What's one more time? Something cold settled in my chest. That, I said slowly, is why this ended. He stood up suddenly. You think you've won, he said bitterly. I stood too. I think I'm free, I replied. He laughed harshly. You'll be alone, he warned. I met his eyes. I was alone while married to you, I said. This is an improvement. He stared at me, stunned. Then he turned and walked out. The door closed behind him. Not slammed. Just closed. And with it, something final settled into place. In the days that followed, Calvin's world continued to shrink. He resigned from boards. People stopped returning his calls. Old allies went quiet. The lies had been his shield. Without them, there was nothing left to hide behind. One afternoon, Elaine called me again. He's blaming me, she said softly. I know, I replied. He says I ruined his life, she continued. I sighed. He ruined many lives, I said. You just stopped pretending. She was quiet. I'm scared, she admitted. So was I said, but truth holds you up if you let it. That evening, I sat alone with my notebook again. I wrote about endings, about how they rarely look like triumph. They look like emptiness first. Space. Room to decide what comes next. As I closed the notebook, I realized something important. I had spent weeks proving the truth. Now came the harder question. What would I build after it? Because justice had been seen. But healing required choice. And tomorrow, I would make the final one. The choice that would decide how the rest of my life would be lived. With bitterness, or with peace. The morning I made my final choice, the sun came up slow and soft. Not bright, not dramatic, gentle. I stood at the kitchen window with a warm cup of tea in my hands and watched the light spill across the yard. The grass was still wet with dew. Birds moved quietly from branch to branch. Life was going on, whether I was ready or not. For the first time in weeks, there were no phone calls. No questions. No accusations. No voices asking me to explain myself again. Just silence. And in that silence, I finally heard my own thoughts clearly. I had told the truth. I had shown the receipts. I had watched the lies fall apart in public. Now the question was simple, but heavy. What kind of woman did I want to be after all this? A bitter one. A woman who replayed every lie until it poisoned what little time she had left. Or a free one. A woman who told the truth, then built something new on top of it. I sat down at the table and opened my notebook one last time. On the first page, I wrote, "I will not spend my last years explaining a man's sins." My hand didn't shake. Later that morning, Ms. Hartley called. "The disclosures are coming in," she said. "It's worse than we thought." I closed my eyes. "I expected that," I replied. "You'll likely receive a fair settlement," she continued. "You've been very patient through all this." I smiled faintly. "I wasn't patient," I said. "I was learning." She paused. "What would you like to do next?" she asked. I took a breath. "I want peace," I said, "and I want my name back." When I hung up, I felt something lift. Not relief. Resolve. Around noon, my children came by together. They sat across from me, quieter than usual. "We talked," my son said. "Yes," my daughter added, "about everything." I nodded. "I know this hasn't been easy," I said. My daughter reached for my hand. "We should have seen it sooner," she whispered. I squeezed her fingers. "We see it now," I replied. "That's what matters." My son hesitated. "Dad is not doing well," he said carefully. I felt a familiar tug in my chest. The old instinct to fix. To soften. To rescue. I breathed through it. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, "but I won't carry him anymore." They nodded. They understood. That mattered more than apologies. That afternoon, I did something symbolic. I packed Calvin's remaining things. Not in anger. Not in haste. Slowly. Carefully. Like closing a chapter in a book I would never reread. I placed the boxes by the door. When I finished, the house felt lighter. As if it could breathe again. In the early evening, Calvin returned one last time. He stood in the doorway, staring at the boxes. "So that's it," he said. "Yes," I replied. He looked at me, searching my face. "You don't hate me," he said slowly. "No," I said honestly, "I don't." That surprised him. "I pity the man you chose to be," I added, "but I don't hate you." He swallowed. "You're really done," he said. "I was done long before I found the receipts," I replied. "I just didn't have proof yet." He nodded once. "I never thought you'd leave," he admitted. "I never thought I'd stay silent this long," I replied. He picked up the boxes. At the door he paused. "You were a good wife," he said quietly. I met his eyes. "I was a good woman," I corrected, "even when you didn't deserve it." He left without another word. When the door closed, I stood still for a long moment. Then I exhaled. Deep. Free. That night, I slept in my own bed again. Not as a wife waiting, but as a woman at peace. Weeks passed. Slowly. Gently. I began to live in ways I never had before. I joined a small writing group. I took morning walks. I laughed, real laughter, the kind that surprises you. People stopped asking me about Calvin. They started asking me about me. And for the first time, I had answers. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sky turn orange and purple, my daughter sat beside me. "You're different," she said. I smiled. "I'm honest," I replied. She nodded. "I like this version," she said. "So do I," I replied. I thought back to the night I overheard the phone call. The hallway. The whisper. The lie. If I could speak to that version of myself now, I would say this. You were never foolish for trusting. You were brave for facing the truth when it finally arrived. I am Bernadine Wells. I am 74 years old. My husband lied about everything for decades. The next day, I showed the receipts. But the most important thing I showed was myself. That my life did not belong to a liar. That truth, even late, still matters. And that it is never too late to choose yourself.